Okay, hi. So I'm here today with Berta, and we're going to talk a little bit about her experiences with medical cannabis and her experiences in the NHS. So first, I wanted to ask a little bit, Berta, if you want to just give us a little bit of an introduction to yourself.
Yeah, hi Aisha. First of all, thank you so much for having me on here today. I'm super excited to share my experience. Okay, a little bit about myself. If you guys can bear with me because my career path is as ADHD as I am. So I initially started my career as in mental health, actually, psychotherapy, working with children, specializing in trauma and abuse, and then moving on to working with adults. Before realizing that I was working with a lot of adults with substance misuse and I had no idea how to support them. I suppose me being the overachiever that I am, I decided that I wanted to actually learn more about substance misuse. Absolutely fell in the head until COVID came along. And not only did COVID knock the wind out of me, but it progressed all of my conditions. Sorry, it took all of my conditions out of remission and then progressed it into the next stage as well. And so battling 40 plus symptoms. I think I'm even averaging 50. I don't know why I always say 40, but I think it's actually 50 plus symptoms. It was um it was impossible to live. It was impossible to even have any form of quality of life. So just to, I suppose, give you a rough idea of my symptoms. There are a lot of them, so I'm not really going to go into each and every single one of them, but I will go into the ones that I suppose impact me on a daily basis, even up until right now. So give me a second. I'm going to look over there because if I don't read off of this list, I'm going to get very confused as to what I've already mentioned to you because confusion is one of them. So nausea, vomiting, upset stomach, lockjaw. That one is possibly one of the worst. I have lost so many teeth as a result, loss of teeth, ulcers and blisters in my mouth and tongue, memory loss. I get very, very confused as well. I can sometimes feel very discombobulated, to the point where I call it tunnel vision because I can only see what's right in front of me. Anything else I'm not able to see. That one has been actually very, very dangerous and very scary at times because I have gone outside in public and tried to cross the street, and mind you, I can only see what's in front of me. So, I should probably clarify that. Sorry, I can only process what's in front of me because I would look around and I would see no cars. I would see an empty road and I would just see the footpath that I need to walk down. And then I start walking down the road and I would get tackled. Or I've even gotten slightly hit by cars. And it's because I did not see the cars. And then when I look again, mind you, this is a 5 second interval, I will look again and I will see we're in gridlock. And it used to scare the living daylights out of me because I couldn't trust my own brain to process what is in front of me. And as a result, was a danger to myself. Loss of appetite. I still struggle to eat a lot. You get like hot flashes or just like even right now, like I'm just like a low grade fever all the time. You're always feeling really stuffy. The headaches are unbelievable. The brain aches are, I call it a brain ache for the record because it's beyond headache at this point. It's beyond migraine. It feels like your brain is about to explode, and then the pressure of your skull is just keeping your brain from exploding. And so you get a lot of memory loss. Oh, the memory loss again, that is possibly one of the scariest for me as well, because I would go days on end without actually being able to remember my own apartment that I've lived in for many years now. I would wake up in my bed and have a panic attack because I wouldn't recognize the room that I'm in. And I, that's just an example. You forget everything. Like the amount of times I've not nearly, I've actually burnt the house. I just haven't burnt it down because I would step out of the kitchen and I would forget that I'm cooking. And oh God, the times when I was fainting was actually the worst because when I'm frequently fainting, I would get really, really hot and then I would collapse. And I again have set fire because I had fainted. There have been times where somebody had to actually break into my house because I had fainted. The alarm had been going off for ages and I just was not conscious. I have a lot of very, I suppose, dangerous examples that people don't realize your conditions can also impact you. It's not just the way that you feel, but it's your entire world around you, how it's perceived, the blurred vision, the sensitivity to stimulus, like my eyes hurt all the time. And I'm talking about my eyeballs. Like, There, obviously I mentioned the paralysis, so it's a different sensation here than it is here, but from time to time this will go. No, at the time it was very frequent. It would just go completely, and I cannot even lift my arm. It would feel so heavy and so numb at the same time and all tingly, and I would literally be unable to lift it, which that combined with pain. And which I'll get into in a second, but that combined with pain, it made it very difficult to even get out of bed to pee. So to give an example, in order for me to have to pee, especially when my arm is, sorry, when the whole left side of my body is gone, I would have to take my blankets, take my pillows, throw them onto the floor, roll my body onto my blankets and pillows, and then drag myself to the bathroom using my right arm only because the side is dead, and drag myself to the bathroom. Which, it's embarrassing to admit because half the time you don't even make it to the toilet seat. You made it to the toilet floor. And it's very difficult, especially with the amount of pain that you're in, to have to consistently throw yourself onto the floor. That was just causing even more damage. But at the same time, I had to pee. So I would literally lie in bed contemplating whether it was appropriate for a 35-year-old to be peeing in their bed. Slurred speech, forgetting of words, insomnia, dizziness. I think I mentioned faintings already, the tremors, the spasticity, inflammation, muscle aches, joints, you name it, stiffness of the muscles and joints as well. But I think overall, all of those symptoms, as horrifying as they are, did not even compare to the pain. The pain was, I suppose, the ultimate killer. You could not function. You could barely think. You were so swollen. It was just agony. You can barely move.
Mm,
And as a result of the pain, I was on, okay, so just to give you an example in terms of like how I had to manage my pain prior to medical cannabis, I would have to take 12 tramadol, 12 naproxen, and 12, I think it's paracetamol daily. And that was just so that I can be comfortable enough to lie in bed. That medication would last in your system for about 40 minutes. And every 40 minutes, I'm just popping them like they're candy. And sometimes I'd hold off for an hour, but it really just depended. No, no. If I'm really in a bad day, sometimes even every half an hour.
mm,
And it was just so that you can be comfortable to lie down in bed, not even to do anything else. Sometimes, if you're lucky, you can move from your bed and go to the couch. But that was my existence for a very, very long time. And like I mentioned, every single symptom impacts you in so many different
mm,
ways.
mm,
But it's very hard to actually even describe. And 36 pain medications a day, or pills a day, like it was appalling. And that's not even to mention the fact that those were just to manage the pain itself. I still had 40 plus symptoms on
everything
top of the
else.
pain.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I also required medication for all of that as well. And so as a result, I think at one point I was juggling about 9 different prescriptions, and it was diazepam, gabapentin, tenazidine, pregabalin, amitriptyline, plus the three that I already mentioned. Every once in a while, I'd throw cocodamol in there, just depends on what the pharmacy had.
Mm,
And how much of my prescription I could get. But needless to say, I was abusing a lot of medication, and I
mm,
say abusing in, yes, the substance misuse way, because I that's exactly what I was doing. I was misusing all of my prescribed medication in order to feel mildly mild. I feel like mildly is too strong of a word. I don't think anyone can ever imagine how ineffective the treatment, all those pills that I was taking.
mm.
And I suppose that sort of just brings me then to I suppose cannabis-based medications.
Do you mind if I just pause for a sec and just ask you a couple more questions around this?
Yeah, of course.
So I wanted to just ask you, so number one, how long were you sort of like experiencing these kinds of symptoms?
Before cannabis.
Yeah, yeah. So like how long is this whole process?
God, so before cannabis, it was 6 months of hell. And
Okay.
then I discovered cannabis, and it was let's say 3 months of purgatory.
Hmm.
And then the last 3 months, finally, you really start to see a difference. I noticed that instantly
Mm.
all of my pain medications were replaced instantly. The other stuff, not that quickly, but all of the pain medication I was able to stop using immediately. Um, but it did take time to sort of like titrate me down from the other medication and titrate me up with a cannabis prescription instead. And I say
Yeah.
that entire process was about 3 months.
Yeah.
Um,
But before that, everything was going on for like at least 6 months, if not longer. It's all sort of been developing and accumulating over some years, would you say?
no, it all happened very rapidly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it all happened very rapidly, and unfortunately, the worst part of it was that 6 months period that I'm describing. And
Mm.
then, after I've come out of that 6 month period, I was still in purgatory for a little bit, so there was still a lot of
Yeah.
going on. And during that period, I think that probably lasted quite long because I was still advocating for my care when it came to my GP and my, I suppose the rheumatology and pain team. So I suppose before I go into it, I always like to say to people that I'm about to complain, but I'm about to complain about the doctors who, in my opinion, took a very scary period in my life and honestly turned it into a tragedy by not listening and by flat out being negligent. There were two amazing doctors in my care, and if it wasn't for these two doctors, I would not be standing here today. So I just really want to emphasize that I am not throwing every single doctor under the bus, but sadly, my experience in healthcare no, it wasn't good. It was terrible.
So can I just say, so were you working at this time or you had to take time out of work as well? So you've had to take time out of work while you're kind of dealing with this absolutely, overwhelming number of symptoms and it's just sort of not being managed. And then you're approaching your primary care, your GP. And so can you just let me know? So obviously they've had to give you the initial prescription. Sort of what was that interaction like? And you're saying that you had a lot of difficulties. So how did you access care? How did you access that specialist care?
Yeah, I just realized I'm totally quoting you wrong. I think it was a year of all those symptoms. Sorry. Remember how
Yeah.
confusion part? Yeah, you have no idea how bad it is.
Mm.
Okay, so initially what sort of happened is I went to my GP when my symptoms started to decline. So I was already struggling a lot prior to it going completely downhill. And the GP just kept telling me that I think initially it started off with, oh, well, it's just COVID. You have to wait for those symptoms to subside a little bit before you can actually determine whether there's been any decline to your health. And I explained, look, I know what my symptoms are like, and these symptoms have significantly gotten worse. And I don't think they're COVID related because the symptoms that I had during COVID time are completely different to the symptoms that have now appeared, which feel more like my fibromyalgia and all the other issues that I had prior. But nobody was listening. They kept telling me that I had health anxiety, that it was in my head. And it wasn't until the point where I got very angry, actually. And I'm pretty sure I was very stern with my GP, and they then decided to do a referral. And again, within the referral, they had written down everything that I just mentioned now, and that I'm the one who's demanding this referral, not that they actually had any concerns themselves. So as a result, that significantly delayed any sort of progress that I made because anyone who looked at that immediately didn't even bother listening to me or speaking to me. They would just say, oh, well, we already read your file. Okay, the file that the GP barely even captured what ex the experience that I was going through. And I actually truly thought that you would at least ask the basic questions as to what am I experiencing. Until today, not a single person in the NHS has a full list of my symptoms because no one cares to even bother writing it down. When I start going through it, they're like, okay, we get it. You have a lot of symptoms,
So then
And
when you've gone to the pain specialist and you've been also referred to rheumatology, then so what was that interaction like when so they've not asked you much about your symptoms and yeah, what was their response? What was their offer of treatment?
so the pain clinic were actually absolutely fantastic. They were the two ones that I was referring to. Rheumatology, when I went in, he was the one that said, okay, you have a lot of symptoms. Wouldn't necessarily listen to me and actually told me that my doctors don't even believe me and made me feel like I was wasting his time. And it wasn't until I saw one of the pain consultants, which I had to pay privately for the record, despite me being a taxpayer, had to pay privately for. And they were the ones that listened to me for a change and were like, no, this does not sound right. And were actually able to explain everything to me and actually explain what was going on with my brain and the symptoms and everything. And I was like, oh my God, yes, this is it. And all it took was for him to listen to me. And he was the one then that wrote a letter. And then my other pain consultant had seen me prior to that. She was already concerned. So she had written a letter to neurology as well. So it wasn't until I think neurology and the pain clinic sort of put pressure on rheumatology to actually investigate it a little bit further, that rheumatology were like, okay, yeah, so we are going to do a scan to rule it out. And the whole idea was for him to prove to me that there was nothing wrong. And what does the scan do? It actually confirms the diagnosis. And so I was very angry because a whole year of my life has been wasted. During that time, I still had teeth. I've lost my teeth since then. So much of my time had been wasted as a result. And when I finally did, even when I tried to speak to him, he then refused to acknowledge that all of this happened and quickly puts me on medication and doesn't even titrate me, puts me on the highest dose. So when I was very ill from that as well, I wasn't even aware of that until I spoke to somebody later on. I can't even remember from where I'm open to so many different places, but damn it, it was a nurse, but I just can't remember from where, what department. But she was the one that actually turned around and said, well, you weren't titrated. That's the highest dose. And I was like, oh, well, that would explain all that sickness. So you know what? My care, there is a lot of times where I actually sit down and I question myself, like, if I was a different race, would I be experiencing this? Because I do, and I'm sorry to say, but I do have a lot of Caucasian friends that don't even have half the symptoms that I have, go to their GP and have the best care ever. And then I go in, I don't know if it's because it's complex health or if it's just systemic racism. It's very, very hard to tell these days, but that is really the feeling that I got. You did not make me feel safe. And I genuinely feel that if my care was left in your hands, I would be dead right now.
Yeah, so you've clearly just been through so much and, kind of trying to access the care and, just follow up, it seems like as well through the NHS just didn't seem to be working. You're having to go to private pain who've kind of listened and giving you a bit more insight, led to a few more concrete diagnoses, but then obviously having more issues with that. So then, obviously this is impacting your health, it's deteriorating significantly over all of this time. I guess you've lost a lot of faith and trust in the healthcare system, even though you work in it yourself, and
Mhm.
clearly it's impacting your work, which you obviously love as well. So it's just had such an impact on every single aspect of your life. And we're not even going into things like relationships or whatever else as well. This is just you functioning on a day-to-day basis. So then I'm wondering, like, how did you find out about medical cannabis? How did you even realize this was an option? And when you went to any of your NHS healthcare providers, what was their response?
Yeah, so I suppose I'll start with when I went to my healthcare provider because that's a little bit quicker. So I pretty much just went and informed them, and they were not happy with it. And as you mentioned, I'm a healthcare professional, so they wanted to raise a safeguarding concern. And I'll be completely honest, I didn't get far because I know my rights. And
Did they
that
did they know how it worked? Did they seem to understand how it worked?
They didn't understand how it worked. They weren't even aware it was legal. And when I did show them that it was legal, they didn't even want to hear about it. Like they were just like, oh yeah, 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 fine. And and to be honest with you, again, I was very ill. No one had time to have that argument with people. I have since gone back and continue any appointment I go to, I always remind them, the only reason I'm better is medical cannabis, just so
Yeah.
that they are aware and I make sure that it's recorded all over my documentation that the reason I'm no longer going to A&E consistently, I'm no longer calling the GP every other day, is because of the fact that medical cannabis gives me 75% relief of all of my symptoms. And I feel like a combination of that and a holistic healthcare approach is what really improved my health. But I'll go there in a second. In terms of how I discovered it, it was actually a colleague of mine who was leaving. So she was one of the consultants in the substance misuse service. And she was actually leaving to go work at I think the very first clinic that opened up. And so at that time, I kind of just like got a prescription to try it, yeah, and wasn't really invested in it that much. Let's just put it like that. It was just sort of something that was there in case I was in a lot of pain and I was struggling with a lot of the opioids because they would make me vomit and, have crazy symptoms. And so I had that there sort of as a backup because they're
Mm,
very, very expensive.
mm,
And so I wasn't really using it that consistently. And at the time, it was in remission, so I didn't need it as frequently. And the funny part was, it wasn't until my health completely deteriorated that I was still going to the GP, and obviously all that medication came from somewhere. And it was at that point that my friend had turned around to me and said, because I had explained to her that I was severely suicidal, because I just could not take it anymore. And the only thought that ever crossed my mind was, if this is what my life is going to be like, I would rather be dead. And she then yelled at me and she was like, "You do realize that you have the medication that will probably work so, so well for you." And, this is where my own sort of stigma comes into it, like, and a lot of the learning that I did for myself, because again, as somebody who works in the substance misuse sector, the only side of cannabis that we ever saw was the substance misuse side. And so in my mind, I was like, "Ugh, whatever, like, yeah, people just want to get high. Like, I'm sure that it's going to have the exact same effectiveness as opioids were having for me. And mind you, I was taking loads of them. And then I just said, fine, I'll increase my dose. I will try it out and everything, just because I was desperate. I was so, so desperate. And so I tried it, and to my shock, I could not believe the effectiveness. I think that was really the first part that got me, because you don't even need that much. You literally don't even need that much. And you're just like, what? And I was popping pills left, right, and center, and it was doing absolutely nothing for me. And here is this thing, you take a little bit, and all of a sudden you're okay. It blew my mind. And I completely just did not need any of the other medications anymore. And I suppose from that moment on, I was pretty much converted. I was determined to come off all of my medication. The only medication that I keep now is the hydroxychloroquine, because the arthritis is just completely out of control. But again, it's a lot well managed now. I get 75% symptom relief. I don't get nowhere near as much of the side effects that I used to get with all of the other pills, because as you can imagine, those side effects just doubled down on the existing side effects that I had, which again made it very, very difficult to function.
mm. So it sounds like it's made a big difference. And I'm wondering, so you obviously weren't able to access this, and I'm guessing the NHS specialists, obviously, as you've mentioned, they didn't know anything about this really. So then you've sort of done your own research and you've gone to the clinics. And I'm wondering if you can just walk us through, like, how did they do their assessment? How did you know what to try? And were they monitoring you, in terms of your existing pain medications? If I was a clinician and I saw someone taking this much stuff, I'd be really worried about their health. And I'm just wondering, how did that transition happen under the guided care of a healthcare professional?
Yeah, so I know these days a lot of people really, really struggle. So I'm just going to highlight my experience. I will mention later the struggles that other people go through, but I was very fortunate enough to not have to go through much of that struggle. So you need to be able to evidence that you've tried, at the time that I was getting it, you need to be able to evidence that you've tried other forms of treatment, and that you actually have all of these conditions. And so once you're able to evidence that via summary of care from your GP and some specialist letters from whatever department you are open to, then you are triaged, and they would make a decision on what is the best, sort of like a preliminary decision on what's the best medication for you. You would go into your appointment and you would just explain to them your sort of like your history, how much medications you're taking, and they would formulate like a very standard sort of like care plan, just to sort of see how you get on over that 4 week period. And then you'd have to go through another review of that medication to make sure that the care plan alongside the medication is signed off by a peer review team of doctors. And then once that has been established, you're able to get your prescription. So it is a little bit of a long-winded process, because it's an unlicensed medication. They have to take a lot of hoops. But that took about 3 weeks, I think, about 3 weeks to a month. And then once you get your prescription, you have to see them again in a month's time, because they need to just make sure that everything is working okay for you. Do you need an increase in medication? Have you decreased on your other medications and stuff like that? And they kind of like revisit your care plan and do a more, I suppose, in-depth care plan with you. And then every 3 months, you review that care plan as you go along. And I think the way that they try to do it is quite similar. They titrate you up as you titrate down. I'll be, again, completely honest. I'm very stubborn, so I like to stop all of my medication cold turkey. The only one I didn't was the diazepam because I'm aware, again, because my work is substance misuse, that's the one medication you do not stop cold turkey unless you want to be having seizures. So I didn't with that one, but the rest of them I pretty much, stopped cold turkey. Did struggle a bit at the start, but honestly, all I did was just increase at that time my cannabis intake. So I'd have to vape more frequently. And then after about 3 months, I started notice this, it started going down. And the
Mm.
minute that I applied a holistic healthcare approach to everything, I have significantly decreased. Now I can't even believe it. Like I've come off my walking stick. Never thought that would happen again. Like, and I'm able to commute. I'm going back, commuting to work, 2 hour commute. Like before I couldn't even walk to the corner shop, guys. Like I don't think you get it. Now I'm commuting 2 hours there, 2 hours back. It's absolutely fantastic.
So clearly there's been a massive difference in your health and your well-being after starting this. And then I guess once you're established on a dosing that you know is good for you. So I'm wondering what was sort of like the reactions from your colleagues when you sort of got to go back to work?
So it was an interesting one, right? Because a lot of my colleagues, I think because they know me, they didn't necessarily judge as much. You will get a few people that will look and they'll be like, Um, but once they saw the transformation in me, I mean, I first of all, I feel a little bit bad because I wonder if I was walking around looking dead. Because the way that people are so shocked makes me think, oh, was I walking around looking dead? Because that level of shock, I'm like, okay, guys, can you like not embarrass me?
Yeah.
But they're completely taken aback. They can't believe it. They're like, oh my God, it actually works. Oh my, and you look really good. And I'm like, what did
Mm.
you expect me to look like?
Yeah. So I guess like you could sort of part of your experience help sort of like destigmatize and educate your colleagues as well, who obviously just really see the brunt end of people that use cannabis. Because, even those people maybe at some point would have used it in a way that they thought was giving them some benefit in terms of like relief from whatever difficulties that they're going through. And it's just because of all the propensities and everything else, it became an extremely problematic and sort of, harmful use. But this is not that. This is something that's on the other end of the spectrum, which is something that allows you to continue to function. And it sounds like pretty cost effective for the NHS as well, because you're not having multiple appointments in primary care or secondary care and attending A&E and sort of like not really getting dealt with. So I think this is quite an interesting thing to witness, especially I can imagine from their point of view what they would have thought beforehand and then afterwards. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about like your experience with the clinic and sort of other people. Like, do you know many other people that are also patients, medical cannabis patients, and what their experiences are?
Yeah. And so, like I mentioned, for myself, the experience is actually quite good. So I can't really say much for myself, but I do a lot of advocacy. So I do come across a lot of patients, and
Yeah.
even in my own, I probably should mention. So I used to be the CQC registered manager for a cannabis clinic. And so during that time, obviously, I would speak to a lot of healthcare professionals and have to educate them on cannabis-based medical products, because a lot of our patients would experience a lot of stigma, actually. I mean, to the point, right? I'll break it down into, I suppose, two different categories. So there is the stigma that a lot of the patients receive from their GPs, before they're even allowed to, I guess, allowed to, but before they even get a prescription. So there has been numerous occasions where I have had to contact the GP and verify our legality, and the GP would then turn around to me, who is the registered manager, and tell me that I'm lying and that
Mm.
it's not a clinic and that they will not send their summary of care. And then when I send them all the evidence and everything, and I send them the CQC details and stuff, then they would turn around, well, I don't agree with that treatment, so I'm not going to send over the summary of care. So just to let everybody know, that is highly illegal. You are not allowed to do that. That violates so many human rights laws. I mean, I'm not even going to go into it. I'm pretty sure everybody is well aware at this point that that is not something that you should do. So you can imagine for this person, then they really struggled to get on a medication that they found quite
Mm.
helpful for them. But because their GP did not support that treatment, we weren't able to actually prescribe this patient. So we've had to discharge them again. Oh no, I know they've taken that up with their GP, but that should never ever happen, especially like I mentioned to you guys, whether it's mental health, whether it's physical health, the impact that it has on our lives and our well-being is significant. And we do not have the energy after that to then have to deal with all of these complications when you're just trying to advocate for your care. There were always a lot of issues as well with other providers. So let's say a patient, I think this was more common with psychiatry patients. We would see a patient where their psychiatrist would say, well, if you're going on that prescription, I'm going to stop working with you. Again, you're not allowed to do that. But you would have these situations, and you can imagine for this person then who has, struggled a really, really long time. I mean, to get a psychiatrist under the NHS means you've had to go through so many loopholes before you get to that point. So this person has been suffering for a very long time and then gets slapped in the face by somebody that they thought they could trust, and being told that they're not going to get any more mental health care because they want to use a medication that is deemed do you know what? I don't even know what the rationale around it is anymore. I
Mm,
mean, I get it, there's all the stigma around substance misuse, but I suppose that one really just goes over my head now because of my understanding of the medication and also because of my own personal abuse of opioid medications
mm,
for my physical health and knowing that all these patients that I've just listed to you guys are abusing so many other prescribed
mm,
medication because um it lacks effectiveness. The only way that they can get any form of relief, sorry, is by actually abusing these medications, and then they get criticized for trying to try something new, something that's a lot more natural. And yeah,
mm,
it
mm.
really just it
Yeah,
blows.
so it's just like you clearly, it means a lot to you, and it really is. It's always hard work advocating for yourself in a healthcare system, and it's hard work being ill. It really is. And I think sometimes maybe medical professionals maybe underestimate how much what the patient is really going through and the extent of what they're going through as well. So I know that you've sort of transitioned more into advocacy, and you're probably like not all patients are going to think about that. Not all patients are going to think, oh, do you know what, I'm going to become this much more involved in this by doing advocacy, educating, becoming more involved in clinics. So I'm wondering, how did that journey look for you, and is there any interesting insights that you can share with us?
Yeah, so for myself, I mean, there was a few reasons. Like, I suppose work that I was doing while I was working in the clinics, and I started to really learn how badly that people are being how badly the stigma is impacting patients and patients actually wanting to reach out for medication. And as somebody that literally was bedbound, for a year, I couldn't. I just thought to myself, like, there is a medication that can actually prevent people from feeling this way, from actually having a real life, from getting their personality back and getting their lives back. Like, and yes, recovery looks different for everybody, but the majority of people so far have significantly benefited from this medication, and yet there's very little awareness around it. And I suppose constantly arguing with hospitals, I'll be honest, hospitals, they're the ones that really, really do my head in. They won't allow a patient to use their prescription. They would rather pump the patient, which I would consider torture, right? Is by pumping the patient with a lot of opioids that the patient has told you does not work for them because you do not want them to use their cannabis prescription in the hospital, which they're legally allowed to do for the record. And so a lot of patients then you go into hospital only to get sicker, come out, and then have to recover from your hospital stay because you had a flare up to go, I don't go to the hospital for flare-ups for the record. I have a flare-up, I die at home. And that's it.
Mhm.
Like, because there's no point. I'm going to go to the hospital only for them to make me sicker. And so there was just too many examples of these, too many people struggling in their lives and not getting any access to healthcare. And then the other side of it was that, with cannabis clinics opening up, CQC weren't really quite sure how to actually register them. So they're all actually registered as primary carer when they really should be registered as a secondary carer because CQC asks people to do a secondary care model while registering as a primary carer. But then when they are inspecting, they inspect as a primary carer. So that means a lot of the times what is overlooked now is the secondary care part of things. And so again, as somebody who truly believes in a holistic healthcare approach, I have been using it my entire life and with natural plant medicine and stuff. I know for myself the best treatment is to actually do the whole package. Do you know what? The best way I can explain this is I'm going to just give a very quick analogy, right? So if you just close your eyes and imagine yourself, you're literally drowning because that's how it feels like to be a patient. You were in the middle of the water, in the middle of the ocean, and you were actually drowning. And then you start swimming up for air. And I feel like that's the medical cannabis. You start swimming up and you get to the top and you can finally breathe again. And you're like, oh my God, this is absolutely fantastic. But then the part that a lot of people forget is that that's not the end of the treatment. You still need to swim to shore. And so that is what EFIDA does. Like, so I started a nonprofit organization to support patients to actually start looking at that journey to swim to shore because you're not out of the water yet. You've just gotten your head out of the water. You're definitely in the best place that you've been all your life, but you do yourself a disservice if you don't actually go straight to the finish line. And so I provide lots of different materials for patients to use to actually use their medication holistically and start looking at various different goal planners where they can start applying a holistic healthcare approach and how to get that sort of started. And I want to start putting up a directory soon as well, where patients that are interested in other healthcare services can actually go and access these healthcare services. And I'm teaching those healthcare professionals about medical cannabis so that these patients then don't have to go and justify their medication. They can just go and get the help they deserve.
Yeah, so that sounds like really incredible work, and it's really good that you get to do this and that you are doing this. I was wondering if you've noticed, so there's lots of different angles for where we can say it breeds inequity and inequalities, and I'm just wondering if you can. Oh, should we pause it a sec?
Yes, 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 my battery.
Okay. Okay, yeah. So yeah, I was wondering if you can talk to us a little bit about some of the inequalities or other inequalities or inequities that you've kind of seen in the space.
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned, there's a lot of stigma. So that really makes it difficult for patients. And then not just stigma from healthcare professionals, there's also stigma from the community, stigma from families. But I think a lot of the times as well that I generally tend to find is that I'm going to be honest, where are the Black people? The majority of people that misuse cannabis recreationally, and we know that they are predominantly self-medicating, are from an ethnic minority community. And a lot of the times I generally tend to find that there's none. There's actually none accessing the services. I'm being dramatic, okay? There's some. Sorry, I'm being dramatic. There is some, but there's only a handful, considering that we know the majority are from ethnic minority background. And so, I know from myself, I generally tend to find that a lot of ethnic minorities don't necessarily trust their GP. And one of the criterias for you actually being able to access medical cannabis is by having your diagnosis on your summary of care, or by a medical professional verifying your diagnosis. So, where a lot of ethnic minorities do not go to their GPs, they are unable, unfortunately, to actually evidence that they are self-medicating. So that makes it very, very challenging for them to actually be able to access the medication that honestly seems to be working well for them if they were to actually apply it and use it correctly as part of a holistic healthcare approach. But are not really given that opportunity. So I think a lot of laws really need to be looked into in terms of how we can actually support because I say ethnic minorities, but there's a lot of other cultures as well that they don't necessarily like medicating or don't necessarily go to their GP for for their physical health or mental health or anything really. And so some of these patients, they would then see medical cannabis and they're like, oh, I'll try that because it's more natural, rather than
Mm.
a pharmaceutical. But because they haven't trialed the pharmaceutical before, they can't really evidence that they've trialed anything for that condition. So then that also ends up being a barrier for them. Um, and I just think the fact that, patients are left to have to talk. Okay, so you're not necessarily allowed to advertise medical cannabis because it's a
Mm.
Schedule 2 medication. So that means clinics, company, they can't advertise the effectiveness of this medication. So that then falls on patients to have to advertise and advocate. And we're tired, guys.
Yeah,
So it really shouldn't be on us to have to do this piece of work. I mean, I love it. It's my passion. I will do it, but I'm tired, and I
yeah.
don't that it really should fall down to patients to have to do this piece of work.
Yeah, so it seems everything is kind of being put onto the patients. Patients are the ones who are most in need. Many of them probably won't access healthcare services because, you've mentioned that obviously there's things about there's things about the inequalities in terms of sort of people from different cultures and backgrounds and their understanding of healthcare. And I think you're right, there has been a severe distrust, an increase in distrust in healthcare and healthcare professionals and institutions and public health messaging. And there is quite a big trend in people being more mistrustful and distrustful of even what healthcare providers are going to say to them. And they do really genuinely ask and seek out for more natural type treatments. I get asked a lot, almost every day. Everyone's like, I don't want to take paracetamol. I'm afraid I'm going to get addicted. I don't like taking medication. I don't like taking drugs, and that's a big thing. So I wonder if something like this, if it was explained in the right way, they might be more amenable to it and it might be more helpful for the kinds of.
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned, there's a lot of stigma. So that really makes it difficult for patients. And not just stigma from healthcare professionals, there's also stigma from the community, stigma from families. But I think a lot of the times as well that I generally tend to find is that I'm going to be honest, where are the Black people? The majority of people that misuse cannabis recreationally, and we know that they are predominantly self-medicating, are from an ethnic minority community. And a lot of the times I generally tend to find that there's none. There's actually none accessing the services. I'm being dramatic, okay? There's some. Sorry, I'm being dramatic. There is some, but there's only a handful, considering that we know the majority are from ethnic minority background. And so, I know for myself, I generally tend to find that a lot of ethnic minorities don't necessarily trust their GP. And one of the criteria for you actually being able to access medical cannabis is by having your diagnosis on your summary of care, or by a medical professional verifying your diagnosis. So, where a lot of ethnic minorities do not go to their GPs, they are unable, unfortunately, to actually evidence that they are self-medicating. So that makes it very, very challenging for them to actually be able to access the medication that honestly seems to be working well for them if they were to actually apply it and use it correctly as part of a holistic healthcare approach. But are not really given that opportunity. So I think a lot of laws really need to be looked into in terms of how we can actually support, because I say ethnic minorities, but there's a lot of other cultures as well that they don't necessarily like medicating or don't necessarily go to their GP for 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 their for their physical health or mental health or anything really. And so some of these patients, they would then see medical cannabis and they're like, oh, I'll try that because it's more natural, rather than
Mm,
a pharmaceutical. But because they haven't trialed the pharmaceutical before, they can't really evidence that they've trialed anything for that condition. So then that also ends up being a barrier for them. Um, and I just think the fact that, patients are left to have to talk. Okay, so you're not necessarily allowed to advertise medical cannabis because it's a
mm,
Schedule 2 medication. So that means clinics, company, they can't advertise the effectiveness of this medication. So that then falls on patients to have to advertise and advocate. And we're tired, guys.
yeah,
Right? So it really shouldn't be on us to have to do this piece of work. I mean, I love it. It's my passion. I will do it, but I'm tired, and I
yeah.
don't that it really should fall down to patients to have to do this piece of work.
Yeah, so it seems everything is kind of being put onto the patients. Patients are the ones who are most in need. Many of them probably won't access healthcare services because, you've mentioned that obviously there's things about there's things about the inequalities in terms of sort of people from different cultures and backgrounds and their understanding of healthcare. And I think you're right, there has been a severe distrust, an increase in distrust in healthcare and healthcare professionals and institutions and public health messaging. And there is quite a big trend in people being more mistrustful and distrustful of even what healthcare providers are going to say to them. And they do really genuinely ask and seek out for more natural type treatments. I get asked a lot, almost every day. Everyone's like, I don't want to take paracetamol. I'm afraid I'm going to get addicted. I don't like taking medication. I don't like taking drugs, and that's a big thing. So I wonder if something like this, if it was explained in the right way, they might be more amenable to it and it might be more helpful for the kinds of symptoms that they might present with, because some of these people actually come with really complex symptoms. And, if you just had a basic understanding of the endocannabinoid system or the biome, you just kind of see why this might be the kind of thing, like in your case, it's used to get you off so many other medications, because sort of instead of this list of multiple meds, you sort of then just go on to one thing instead that kind of covers quite a lot of the things that you're trying to manage. So yeah, I think there's a, sorry, you want to say something?
Yeah, sorry. No, no, no. It's just on that note, can I just read something that I prepared very, very
Yeah.
quick? Because I think this will help sort of put a little bit of things into perspective for some healthcare professionals, yeah? Because at least I tend to find that when I explain it to them like this, they're like, oh, good point, yeah. So
Mhm.
let's just look at the medication itself, right? So we're gonna look at cannabis, the medication, right? And it's used to treat a variety of different conditions, from pain conditions, neurological conditions, psychiatric conditions, gastrointestinal, insomnia, palliative care. And the side effects include drowsiness, confusion, imbalance, euphoria, diarrhea, dry mouth, anxiety, depression. Some people, if you have enough of it, can develop dependence or tolerance or cannabis hypermesia syndrome. And again, that's fewer than some. Adverse reactions. This is if somebody has an allergic reaction, yeah. Headaches, migraines, nausea, and vomiting and diarrhea, right? So these are just very generic symptoms that you would get with any medication, right? So let's quickly just compare, right? So I'm going to just pick the most commonly prescribed medication that is opiates, tramadol, yeah, and paracetamol, right? So let's look at the side effects of tramadol. Headaches, dizziness, sedation, drowsiness, constipation, loss of appetite, nausea, vomiting, sweating, muscle weakness, physical dependence. Let's look at the adverse reaction. Nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, difficulty breathing, respiratory depression, which can result in death. Paracetamol, which is the most commonly over-the-counter painkiller, side effects, tiredness, breathlessness, blue fingers and lips, anemia, liver and kidney damage, heart disease, stroke if you have a high blood pressure, and then adverse reactions, abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting, liver problems, seizures, coma, and death. And just very quickly, mental health medication. The most commonly prescribed is citalopram. Citalopram, side effects, headaches, tiredness, insomnia, excess sweating, lethargic, nausea, changes in menstrual cycle, unintentional weight loss or gain, and restlessness. And then the adverse reactions include headaches, memory problems, nausea, vomiting, chest pain, shortness of breath, dizzy or fainting, erection for longer than 2 hours, suicidal ideation, seizures, cognitive difficulties. And the most commonly over-the-counter sort of, I suppose, anxiety sort of medication is called CAMS. It's a
Mhm.
valerian root. Yeah.
That
So
interacts with so many other drugs as well, so you have to be really careful.
I know, yeah, and this is what I'm trying to say. And the side effects: headaches, nausea, stomach cramps, yeah, adverse reaction, diarrhea, tachycardia, and something that I can't even pronounce,
Mm.
Pru pruritus, P-R-U.
Pruritus, yeah, like
Yeah,
itchiness,
I
yeah.
don't even know what that is. Right? But do you see the point that I'm trying to make, though, is that when we look at the actual medication itself, right, and then you start look and think about the effectiveness of that medication. Number one, the medication is more effective than all this medication that we've just listed here. And I can definitely vouch for that, and so can lots of other patients. And number two, look at the side effects. Not once did I mention death in medical cannabis, like not once did I mention seizures. I mean, paracetamol side effects are even worse than medical cannabis. But for some bizarre reason, I think all of that is overlooked because people associate cannabis with delinquency. And so the minute they hear cannabis, they don't even look at the medication anymore or the effectiveness of the medication or the fact that the patient is getting much less evasive side effects or symptoms, even when you're having an adverse reaction. I've had an adverse reaction to medical cannabis before, for the record, guys, yeah. And I'm telling you right now, my flare-ups are worse than my adverse reaction was, okay? And I'll leave it there.
Yeah. No, no, that's really excellent. And I think it's something that I try and mention. And I think this is part of sort of like this historical stigmatization, and it's been driven underground. And then all medical professionals are ever going to hear about it, if they hear about it, is only ever in a negative context, which is based on a lot of misinformation and not really evidence-based at all. But unfortunately, that is the type of experience and understanding that we're coming, because you've said to me your healthcare professionals didn't even know that an endocannabinoid system exists. So how can they know how it works? How can they know what the negative effects really are? And they have to, if they have no experience of it in a therapeutic context, how can they give you an informed decision or an informed option to make a shared care agreement to be able to decide what is in the best interests for you based on your situation? So it's an extremely difficult situation to be coming from as a healthcare professional as well as a patient. And this is sort of like where the issue, this constant sort of friction and battle is. So I know you're doing a lot more in your work, and I'm just wondering, to sort of tie it all in and sort of, think about the future. Um, how do you see the medical cannabis industry developing in the UK in a more equitable way?
I mean, for myself, I just wanted to be merged in with the NHS or whatever is going to replace the NHS, because yeah. But I wanted to all be just merged in. Like I've always said, it's not about replacing everything and being like, don't take that medication. Patients have the right to take whatever they want to take, and that is inclusive of medical cannabis. And I also am very mindful that I'm fortunate enough to just about barely be able to afford my prescription, but there are people out there that
Mm,
can't. So they're rationing their medication, or they're not even getting the medication that they have actually trialed, found worked for them, but can't afford. So they've had to stop. And there's
mm.
driving them into the black market, putting them in a lot of danger. I mean, it could be laced, it could be, yeah, so I don't think that when a person is going through that much hell in their life that they should have to do any of that. They should just be able to go to their GP and get their prescription. But yes, I understand it needs to be started by a consultant. The consultant can start it and do a shared care agreement with their GP, and that should be subsidized by the NHS because it is healthcare at the end of the day, and that is a patient that is just trying to get symptom relief.
Yeah, yeah. So absolutely. So I think NHS in terms of accessibility essentially, and I guess behind that also comes like, making sure we use that to be able to, generate the evidence to see what works in different kinds of populations for different kinds of conditions. And then also like where it's applied, because you've mentioned, we don't want people to be stuck with the supply and it's a poor quality supply, which could then actually cause more harm and in the end not really be worth it for patients. So yeah, I think if we can get more, if we can just try and figure out a way to get it more embedded into something like the NHS or whatever the NHS is going to turn it into, that's going to improve accessibility and it might end up helping in a lot of other ways and maybe a lot of hidden populations and communities, rebuilding some of this trust that we've lost because we're using it as part of a toolkit of holistic care for a patient, which I think all clinicians are getting much more sort of training and information about now, like thinking about, we need to think about like mental health more, we need to think about people's diets and lifestyle changes. Like it's something that gets very quickly, like overlooked because, maybe we don't have time in the consultation, but essentially it sounds to me like that you can't really have this treatment and it won't really be effective. You can't just go get medical cannabis and that's it. You have to still do the rest of the work and you have to make the rest of those lifestyle changes to make all of it beneficial really, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And I think you mentioned something about trialing. Guys, patience, let's all do as many trials as we can. I am registered to pretty much every single cannabis trial there is because at the end of the day, it's to benefit other people like myself who have complex health needs and to show
Mm,
them that, you know what, you don't have to be juggling night. I recently did, so I have got my own podcast as well. And in my own podcast, I just recently recorded with somebody who had 21 medications,
mm.
another who had 17, like, and they've replaced all of it with just cannabis. Like, so this medication, guys, I really feel that people need to just take a step back from all of their concerns. Their concerns are valid, right?
Mm.
And like any medication, you mitigate the risks. But at the end of the day, let's try to not dismiss a medication because of its historic association.
Yeah, that's really great. Thank you so much for your time. And we will share lots of links and links to your podcast, so people can learn more and get involved if they want to support your work. So yeah, thank you so much for your time, Berta.
No, thank you so much for having me, Aisha. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.